The air inside the collapsed building tasted like concrete dust and failure. Captain Garrett Riker pressed his back against a section of wall that had once been vertical and counted his people for the 100th time in 3 days. 12 Rangers. The number never changed, no matter how many times he ran it through his head, no matter how desperately he wanted it to be different. Above them, what remained of the second floor created a jagged ceiling of rebar and broken beams. Daylight filtered through 7 distinct gaps in the structure, and Riker had memorized each one. 7 gaps meant 7 firing lanes. 7 ways to die if anyone moved wrong. Sergeant First Class Wade Sullivan lay against the far wall, infection spreading through his leg with the patience of a predator. 40% ammunition remaining, maybe 2 days of water if they rationed like monks. 3 wounded who needed evacuation yesterday, and 1 who needed it right now. Riker keyed his radio, keeping his voice low. Viper 6 to actual, requesting status update on extraction options. Major Sarah Blackwood's voice came through with measured calm that told him everything before she spoke. Viper 6, we have completed drone analysis of your sector. I need you to understand what we're dealing with. 8 enemy snipers had established positions in a perfect ring around their location. Elevated buildings, reinforced structures, overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible route out. The enemy had taken their time setting this trap, and they had set it well. 8 shooters, Riker said. Confirmed. Confirmed. We believe foreign-trained, possibly advisors. They knew exactly what they were doing. There is no gap in their coverage. The radio crackled with distant rotor wash. Riker moved to a crack in the wall and pressed his eye to the narrow opening. A Black Hawk was coming in low from the east. He had seen this twice before, and he knew how it would end. The aircraft banked hard, beginning its descent. The door gunner opened fire on a rooftop, suppressing what he thought was the threat. The first round punched through the Black Hawk's tail rotor from a different direction entirely. The second came from somewhere else. The pilot fought for control as the aircraft shuddered and pulled away, trailing smoke. Third attempt. Third failure. Same result every time. Riker turned away. His Rangers watched him with eyes that held questions he couldn't answer. Rodriguez and Mills positioned near the wounded, rifles ready. Harris rationed the remaining water into careful portions. Specialist Reyes appeared at Riker's shoulder. Captain, I need to talk to you about Sullivan. Riker followed the medic to where Sullivan lay. The sergeant's breathing was rapid and shallow. Reyes pulled back the bandage, angry red spreading outward from the entry point, dark lines tracing up toward the hip. Sepsis, Reyes said quietly. The round fragmented inside. I got most of the pieces out, but not all. He needs surgery. Timeline is 36 hours, maybe 40 if he's lucky. After that, the infection reaches his organs. Sullivan opened his eyes. His voice came out cracked and dry. Captain, don't let them risk another helicopter for me. Riker gripped the sergeant's shoulder, feeling the fever heat. Nobody is writing anybody off. We're getting out of here. He moved back to the radio. Actual, this is Viper 6. I have a critical casualty with a 36-hour window. What are our options? Blackwood's pause told him everything. Viper 6, we are working on alternatives. Colonel Brennan is evaluating a ground assault, but timeline is 72 hours minimum. Sullivan doesn't have 72 hours. I understand. We are exploring every option available. The radio went silent. 36 hours. That was how long Sullivan had. That was how long all of them had before the math caught up with hope. 60 kilometers away, in a support operations office that smelled like coffee gone cold and printer toner, Staff Sergeant Kira Thornwood sat in front of 3 monitors and listened to men die in real time. Not literally, not yet, but she could hear it coming in every radio transmission from Viper 6, in every pause between responses, in the way Captain Riker's voice carried the weight of a man watching a clock count down to 0. She had been monitoring the situation for 8 hours. Support operations wasn't supposed to monitor tactical frequencies, But Kira had learned long ago that following protocol and doing the job right weren't always the same thing. The drone feed filled her center monitor, thermal imaging showing 8 heat signatures in their positions around the collapsed building. She had been studying them for hours, mapping fields of fire, tracking movement patterns, building a picture of how they thought and where they were vulnerable. Everyone was vulnerable if you looked at the problem the right way. Kira pulled up a tactical map and began marking positions. 8 red dots in a near-perfect circle. She traced firing lanes in yellow, overlapping zones in orange. The pattern made her heart beat faster. The enemy snipers had done exactly what they were trained to do, interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. Professional discipline, patient hunters. But they weren't watching each other. Every gun pointed inward, focused on the Rangers. Every sight line converged on that collapsed building. A perfect trap for a rescue force, for helicopters and ground assault teams. They hadn't built a trap for someone coming from behind. Kira began running calculations. Distances, angles, wind patterns, elevation changes. The eastern ridge would give her line of sight to all 8 positions in sequence. If she approached from that direction, if she moved through sectors they weren't watching, she could engage them one at a time. Each kill opening the angle for the next shot. 8 targets, 8 shots, specific order. 1 sniper against 8, but 1 sniper they wouldn't see coming. She saved her analysis to a tablet and stood. Her watch showed 0:43. The operations center would be running skeleton crew. Perfect time to present a plan that would get laughed out of the room during normal hours. Sullivan had 36 hours, and 12 Rangers were counting hours they didn't have. Someone had to try. The tactical operations center hummed with equipment and tension. Blue light cast shadows across uniforms and coffee cups gone cold. Major Blackwood stood at the main display, studying drone footage showing 8 red markers. Behind her, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Brennan paced with restless energy. The door opened. Kira walked in carrying her tablet, and every head turned toward the support operations patch on her shoulder. "Major Blackwood," Kira said, her voice steady despite adrenaline. "I have an analysis of the situation with Viper 6. Brennan stopped pacing. "Staff Sergeant, this is a restricted briefing. Support operations doesn't have clearance for..." "With respect, sir, 12 Rangers are dying while we discuss clearance levels." The room went quiet. Blackwood studied Kira. "Show me your analysis." Kira moved to the main display and pulled up her tactical map. 8 red markers, firing lanes in yellow, overlapping zones in orange. The enemy has created perfect coverage against conventional rescue, but they're not covering each other. Every gun is pointed inward. She traced a blue line from the eastern ridge through the sniper positions. "If I approach from here, I can engage them in sequence. Each kill opens the angle for the next shot. I can eliminate all 8 within the 36-hour window." Brennan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Excuse me, Staff Sergeant. Who authorized you to be in this briefing?" "I authorized myself, sir. Those are Rangers out there." Brennan moved closer, using his height advantage. "Your people? You're attached to support operations. You're a range shooter who has never taken a shot that mattered in combat. And you're telling me you can do what 3 helicopter crews and our entire tactical planning section cannot?" Kira met his eyes without flinching. "I'm telling you there's a vulnerability in their positioning that your tactical section missed because they were looking at the problem wrong." She touched her tablet and the display shifted, showing specific approach vectors, hide positions, engagement angles. They position themselves to cover the Rangers. Every firing lane points inward, but they're not covering each other. If I approach from the eastern ridge, I can engage them in sequence. 1 sniper against 8, Brennan said. That's your plan. 1 sniper they won't see coming. 1 sniper approaching from a direction they're not watching. They built a trap for a rescue force. They didn't build a trap for a single shooter coming from behind. Command Sergeant Major Patterson stepped forward from the shadows. His voice carried 30 years of uniform. Staff Sergeant, what are your qualifications for this mission? Kira turned to face him. This was the question that mattered. 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments in support operations. Longest confirmed shot at 2,100 meters. Trained at the Army Marksmanship Unit before transfer to operational duty. Patterson's expression shifted. Something that had been skepticism became calculation. 47 kills in support operations. Blackwood understood what Patterson was recognizing. Support operations was where certain missions went to stay quiet, where certain shooters went when their work wasn't meant to appear in official combat statistics. Brennan saw Patterson's reaction, and his jaw tightened. I don't care if she has 100 kills on paper. This is a combat sniper mission requiring combat sniper certification. She is support personnel. Kira's voice didn't rise, but something in it hardened. Those 12 Rangers have 36 hours. Your ground assault takes 72. I'm offering you an option that works within the window you actually have. And when you fail, Brennan said, it sets women in combat roles back 20 years. If I fail, Kira answered, 12 Rangers die. That's what actually matters. Not your politics, not your categories. 12 lives against 8 shots. I can make those shots. The room went quiet. Kira stood alone in the center, waiting for an answer that would determine whether she got the chance to prove what she already knew. The answer came fast and final. Request denied. Brennan's voice cut through the silence. Staff Sergeant, you lack combat sniper certification, and your operational designation does not authorize independent tactical missions. Return to your duty station. Kira didn't move. Sir, the certification requirement is administrative. My qualification scores exceed every certified sniper currently assigned to this theater. I said denied. Brennan's voice rose. Your support personnel. This is a combat operation. Those categories exist for a reason, and I will not throw them out because you watched some drone footage and drew lines on a map. Kira felt her hands curl into fists. She forced them open. Yes, sir. She turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling like watching Sullivan die because the right category mattered more than the right shot. Behind her, Blackwood's voice came quiet but clear. Sergeant Major Patterson, a word, please. Kira kept walking. The door closed behind her, and she stood in the corridor, breathing hard, trying to push down the rage. 4 years. 4 years of being the best shooter on every range, of scoring higher than certified snipers, of watching her recommendations for combat designation get denied. And now 12 men would die because someone had decided her paperwork mattered more than her skills. She started walking toward the exit. She made it 20 steps before her phone buzzed. Blackwood's number. Thornwood. Don't leave the building. Conference room 3. 5 minutes. The line went dead. Conference room 3 was small and empty. Kira waited, her mind racing through possibilities, most of them bad. The door opened. Blackwood entered, followed by Patterson. The sergeant major's face was set in a way Kira recognized from watching senior NCOs prepare to fight battles that had nothing to do with enemy combatants. Blackwood pulled up a file on her tablet and handed it to Kira. Read the mission summaries, not the classification headers, the actual content. Kira scrolled through the documents. High-value target eliminations in 4 separate denied areas. Precision fires supporting operations that officially never happened. Engagement distances matching or exceeding any combat sniper on record. These missions are all listed as support operations, Patterson said, because someone decided they should be. Blackwood pulled up a second file. Look at the routing. Every time you were recommended for combat designation, the paperwork was rejected at the same level. Different reviewing officers over 4 years. Same result every time. Someone has been keeping you in support status deliberately, Patterson said. Why? The word came out harder than Kira intended. Blackwood and Patterson exchanged a look. The sergeant major's jaw was set. Because qualified female snipers are a problem for people who have built their careers on certain assumptions. Easier to bury you in the wrong category than admit those assumptions were wrong. Patterson walked to the door, then turned back. "Wait here." He left. Kira looked at Blackwood. "What's happening?" Patterson is doing what senior NCOs do when officers make the wrong call for the wrong reasons. He's going to fix it. Patterson found Brennan in his office, reviewing staging plans for the ground assault that would arrive too late to save Sullivan. "Colonel, I need a word." Brennan glanced up. "What is it, Sergeant Major?" Patterson kept his voice low, but there was iron underneath. 12 Rangers, 36 hours, qualified volunteer. You just documented your refusal to authorize her. "I'm following protocol, Sergeant Major. That's regulation." Patterson leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "You're telling me you would rather let 12 Rangers die than let a qualified sniper attempt a rescue because of an administrative designation that someone else assigned to keep her out of exactly these situations?" Brennan straightened. "I'm telling you that my decision is final and this conversation is over." Patterson held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Every year of his 30-year career was visible in that look. "Get General Morrison on secure comm. Now." "Sergeant Major, you don't have authority to—" "Watch me." The connection to General Morrison took 4 minutes. When Morrison's voice came through, it had the clarity of encrypted satellite relay and the edge of someone woken for something that better be important. "This is Morrison. What have you got?" Patterson laid it out in precise terms. 12 Rangers trapped, 8 snipers with overlapping coverage, critical casualty with 36-hour window, ground assault timeline of 72 hours minimum, volunteer sniper with verified qualifications offering solo elimination mission. Request denied by Tactical Operations Commander citing administrative designation. Morrison's pause lasted 5 seconds. "Who is the volunteer?" "Staff Sergeant Kira Thornwood, sir. Currently assigned support operations. 47 confirmed kills. Longest shot 2,100 meters. AMU trained. Every combat designation recommendation denied over 4 years at the same administrative level." Another pause. Papers rustling in the background. Morrison pulling files, checking facts. "And Brennan denied her based on her support designation?" "Yes, sir. His objection and reasoning are logged in the operations record." Morrison's voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too many good soldiers lost to bad decisions. "Thornwood is authorized for immediate deployment. My authority. Log my override of Colonel Brennan's objection. I want the full record preserved." "Understood, sir." The connection ended. Patterson turned to find Brennan standing behind him, face pale with fury. The sergeant major walked past without a word and headed for conference room 3. Kira was still reading her file when Patterson appeared in the doorway. His expression told her everything before he spoke. "You're authorized. General Morrison's direct order. Brennan's objection is logged and overruled." Something flickered in Kira's chest. Not relief, not triumph. Something harder and colder, like a blade being drawn. "When?" "Now. Staging area is prepping your gear." Blackwood appeared behind Patterson. "Equipment manifest is ready. You'll have full communication support and real-time drone coverage." Kira stood. Her mind was already moving through the mission, through approach routes and hide positions, and 8 shots that would determine whether 12 men lived or died. "I need current weather data for the operational area and updated enemy positions." "Already pulled," Blackwood said. "I'll walk you through it on the way to staging." They started toward the door. Kira made it 3 steps before another voice stopped her. "When you fail out there, and you will fail, remember that you did this to yourself." Brennan stood in the corridor, his uniform perfect, his posture rigid with certainty. "You could have stayed in your lane," Brennan continued. "Now every woman who wants a combat role will have to explain why Kira Thornwood thought she was special and got 12 Rangers killed trying to prove it." Kira held his gaze. Her voice was steady, each word measured and deliberate. If I fail, Colonel, 12 Rangers die. That's the only thing that matters. Not your categories, not your predictions. 12 lives. I suggest you start hoping I succeed, because right now I'm the only option those men have. She walked past him toward the staging area. Behind her, Blackwood and Patterson exchanged a look. The Major began preparing the mission support package. In 36 hours, they would know whether Kira Thornwood was everything her record suggested, or whether Brennan had been right all along. The door opened again before Kira reached staging. A man in his late 60s entered, wearing the uniform of a retired colonel with combat patches that spoke of wars most people in the room had only read about. Colonel James Mackenzie moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent decades making every motion count. His eyes found Kira, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, followed by something harder to read. Colonel Mackenzie, Morrison's voice came through the speaker system. Thank you for coming on short notice. General, Mackenzie's voice carried the gravel of age and experience. You said it was urgent. Staff Sergeant Thornwood is conducting a solo counter-sniper operation. 8 targets, 36-hour window. I want you as tactical advisor. Remote coordination from Operations Center. Mackenzie's eyes never left Kira. I trained her 4 years ago, top student I ever had. He paused. But this is combat, not a range. Kira felt something tighten in her chest. Colonel, You're brilliant with mathematics in perfect conditions, Mackenzie said. Combat adds variables you can't calculate. Stress, fear, the weight of knowing 12 men die if you miss. I won't miss. Everyone misses eventually. Mackenzie turned to Morrison's speaker. General, with respect, send me instead. I've made these shots under fire. Morrison's voice was firm. Your hands shake from nerve damage, Jim. We both know it. Mackenzie's jaw tightened. His hands at his sides showed a subtle tremor he couldn't quite control. Silence filled the corridor. Kira stepped forward. Colonel Mackenzie, you taught me everything I know, but you can't take this shot for me. Those Rangers need someone with steady hands and fresh eyes. That's me, not you. Mackenzie studied her for a long moment. If you fail, 12 Rangers die. I know. That's why I won't fail. Morrison's voice ended it. Thornwood deploys. Mackenzie provides tactical support from Operations Center. Final decision. Kira walked towards staging, passing Mackenzie without another word. Behind her, she heard him speak quietly to the speaker. When she proves me wrong, I'll be the first to admit it. And if she doesn't, Morrison asked, then I'll carry that guilt until I die. The staging area smelled like gun oil and possibility. Kira moved through the equipment check with practiced efficiency, her hands performing tasks they had done hundreds of times, while her mind was already 60 kilometers away. M110, semi-automatic sniper system, 20 rounds of match-grade 7.62 millimeter ammunition. Ghillie suit tailored to the terrain profile, night vision optics, rangefinder, weather meter, 90 pounds of equipment that would become part of her body for the next 36 hours. Blackwood appeared with a tablet showing real-time drone footage. Updated enemy positions as of 10 minutes ago. All 8 maintaining their original hides. No indication they're aware of any threat beyond the Rangers. Kira studied the feed. 8 heat signatures in a near-perfect circle, exactly where they had been hours ago. Professional discipline, patient hunters. Weather? Kira asked. Southeast wind averaging 6 knots, gusting to 8. Temperature dropping through the night, should bottom out around 40 degrees just before dawn. Cloud cover moving in around 0600. Kira filed the information away, already adjusting calculations for wind drift and temperature effects on bullet trajectory. Insertion? Black Hawk will drop you 6 kilometers from the target zone, 8 hours to infiltrate and establish your first position. That puts you in place just before dawn. Enemy patrol patterns? Sporadic. They're running security sweeps every 4 to 6 hours, but coverage is loose. They think they have all the time in the world. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest. They were wrong about that. They had about 34 hours left. She finished her equipment check and stood. The ghillie suit added 30 pounds to her frame, but her body knew how to carry it. I'm ready. Blackwood hesitated, then spoke quietly. Morrison pulled your full record. Everything, not just the sanitized version. He knows what you've done, what you're capable of. So do I. So does Patterson. She paused. Brennan knows too. That's why he's scared. Kira looked at her. I'm not doing this to scare anyone. I know, but you're going to anyway. The Black Hawk touched down for 6 seconds. Kira was out and moving before the skids fully settled, her boots hitting rocky ground as the helicopter lifted away into darkness. The rotor wash faded and silence closed around her. 4 kilometers to the target zone. 8 hours until dawn. 34 hours until Sullivan died. She moved through the darkness with her rifle across her back and her ghillie suit making her part of the landscape. The terrain was rough, broken hills and dry creek beds that didn't appear on standard maps, but she had memorized the drone imagery down to individual rock formations. Her feet found paths her eyes could barely see. The eastern ridge rose ahead, a black mass against a sky full of stars. Her first overwatch position waited at the top, a natural depression between 2 boulders that would give her line of sight to the first 3 sniper positions. 8 shots in precise order, each kill opening the angle for the next. She had covered 2 kilometers when her radio buzzed. Not a voice transmission, just a data packet. Updated drone imagery showing her route clear of enemy patrols. Blackwood was watching from 60 kilometers away. Kiera kept moving. The ridge grew closer with each step. 8 enemy snipers who had no idea she existed. 12 rangers counting on someone being good enough. She thought about Brennan's words. When you fail, not if, when. But Kiera had learned something in 4 years of being told she wasn't qualified for work she was already doing. Inevitable was just another word for nobody had tried yet. She reached the base of the ridge and began to climb. Above her, stars wheeled in their courses. Somewhere ahead, 8 men waited in hides they thought were secure. Somewhere behind, 12 rangers were running out of time. And between them, a woman who had been told she didn't belong was about to prove that belonging was the wrong question. The right question was whether she could make the shot. She already knew the answer. The alternate route cost Kira 90 minutes she didn't have. 30 meters from the ridgeline, she had heard voices. Enemy patrol. 4 men moving along the trail that led directly to where she needed to be. Kira had frozen in the shadow of a boulder, controlling her breathing until it was barely movement at all. The patrol passed within 50 meters, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness. They were casual, talking in low voices, weapons slung. Men who thought they had already won. She gave them 5 minutes to clear, then began moving east. The new path was steeper, rockier. Twice she had to backtrack when terrain became impassable. The 90-minute delay stretched toward 2 hours. Dawn grayed the eastern horizon as she finally reached her position. The depression between 2 boulders was smaller than drone footage had suggested, barely large enough for her body and rifle. She wedged herself into the space and began the slow process of becoming invisible. Ghillie suit adjusted to break her outline, rifle positioned with minimal exposure, scope covers removed, lens angled to prevent reflection. Every movement deliberate, every adjustment calculated, 28 hours remaining. Sullivan was dying while she lay motionless on a cold ridge. Kiera keyed her radio, voice barely above a whisper. Whisper 6 in position, beginning observation. Blackwood's voice came back immediately. Copy, Whisper 6. Drone shows all 8 targets maintaining positions. No change in enemy activity. The sun cleared the horizon, and the valley below came into focus through her scope. Buildings and streets and skeletal remains of a city that had seen too much war. Somewhere down there, 12 Rangers were counting hours they didn't have. Kira began her scan. Position 1 should be visible from here. An elevated rooftop 1,400 meters to the southwest. She swept her scope across the building, searching for telltale signs. Sandbags, camouflage netting, the subtle discoloration of a hide occupied for days. Nothing. The rooftop appeared empty. She expanded her search pattern, checking windows and shadows. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. Her window continued to shrink. Movement. Not on the rooftop, but one floor below. In a window outside the optimal firing position. A spotter adjusting observation equipment, his silhouette visible for 3 seconds before he pulled back. Kira traced the angle from spotter's position to the rooftop structure above. There, a slight discoloration in concrete where someone had constructed a hide inside the building itself, firing through a concealed port. Patient preparation that took days. Professional training. The shooter wasn't on the rooftop. He was inside the structure, firing through an opening she couldn't see from here. She studied the building for another 10 minutes, mapping internal layout in her mind, calculating where the hide must be, based on spotter's position and angles required to cover Rangers. The firing port would be small, maybe 8 inches wide. At 1,400 meters, a target the size of her fist. But the spotter had given her the answer. The spotter was 1 floor below, positioned to feed targeting information to shooter above, which meant the shooter had to expose himself periodically to receive that information. A gap in the hide where communication happened. Vulnerability born from 2 men working as one. She settled deeper and waited. Patience was a weapon, and she had learned to wield it better than most people wielded rifles. 3 hours of absolute stillness. 3 hours watching a concealed position through her scope, while sun climbed and shadows shortened, and wind shifted through patterns she tracked with each breath. Her body became part of the ridge. Her mind remained sharp, focused on finding the moment when vulnerability revealed itself. The radio remained silent. Blackwood was letting her work, trusting her judgment. Somewhere in the operations center, 60 kilometers away, people were watching drone feeds and probably arguing about whether she could pull this off. Kira didn't care. The only opinion that mattered was physics. The wind steadied. Light reached optimal angle. And 1,400 meters away, the shooter in position 1 shifted his rifle to track movement in the Rangers building. His head came into view for less than 2 seconds. A quick glance down to receive information from his spotter, then back to his scope. 2 seconds of exposure in 3 hours of waiting. It was enough. Kira had already calculated the shot during observation. Wind drift, bullet drop, slight angle from elevated position. Her crosshairs were positioned exactly where his head would appear. All she had to do was wait for the pattern to repeat. 90 seconds later, it did. The shooter's head appeared in the gap. Kira exhaled half a breath and squeezed. The M110 kicked against her shoulder. The suppressor reduced sound to a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, but gave no precise direction. The round began its journey, dropping through the arc she had calculated. 1.4 seconds of flight time. 1.4 seconds where nothing existed except physics and trajectory, and absolute certainty that she had done everything right. 1,400 meters away, the target dropped. No movement, no sound except distant echo rolling across the valley. Kira was already moving before the echo faded. 200 meters east to a secondary position she had identified during approach. The echo would give the enemy a general direction, but not a precise location. By the time anyone triangulated sound, she would be somewhere else entirely. Enemy response came through her earpiece as Blackwood relayed intercepted radio traffic. Confusion, shouting, questions about what happened and where the shot originated. But no coordinated response, no counter-sniper protocols. They were watching the Rangers, not each other. Kira settled into her new position and began scanning for target 2. 4 kilometers away, Captain Garrett Riker pressed his eye to a gap in concrete and tried to understand what he had just witnessed. The distant crack had reached him a full second after he saw the enemy position go still. One moment, movement; the next moment, nothing. His radio crackled with a voice he didn't recognize. Female, calm, professional. Tango 1, down. Riker keyed his handset. Viper 6 to Whisper 6. Say again your last. The response was immediate. Tango 1 eliminated. Moving to Tango 2. Who the hell are you? The radio went silent. Whoever was out there had already moved on to the next target. Sullivan stirred against the wall, his eyes finding Riker's face through the fever haze. Captain, what's happening? Riker shook his head. Someone's hunting them. I don't know who. He turned back to the gap and resumed watching. Somewhere in those hills, a sniper he had never met was doing what 3 helicopter crews and an entire tactical operations center had failed to accomplish. Kira identified Target 2 through her scope. Mosque Minaret, 1,650 meters to the northwest. A more difficult shot than the first, complicated by the narrow window the shooter had chosen as firing port and stone construction that had survived centuries of war. She could see his rifle barrel extending through the gap, but his body was concealed behind walls that would stop anything she could fire. The window opening was perhaps 18 inches wide. At this distance, placing a round through that gap required precision that left no margin for error. She calculated angles and holdover and slight crosswind that had developed since her first shot. Wind was southeast at 6 knots, gusting occasionally to 8. At 1650, that meant her round would drift nearly 2 feet right during flight. She had to aim outside the window and trust wind to carry the bullet through. The shooter shifted position. His shoulder came into view for a moment as he adjusted his stance, darker fabric against pale stone interior. Kira marked the rhythm of his movement, the pattern of adjustments, predictable humanity of a body that couldn't remain perfectly still for hours. She waited through 2 more cycles, confirming the pattern. On the 3rd cycle, she fired. The round crossed 1,650 meters in just under 2 seconds. It passed through the 18-inch window gap with inches to spare and found the shoulder she had seen moving in previous cycles. The impact spun the target sideways. A second later, he tumbled forward, his body falling through the window opening. His rifle clattered down the minaret's exterior, bouncing off stone with metallic sounds that carried across morning stillness. Tango 2 down, Kira reported, moving to Tango 3. Blackwood's voice carried something that might have been wonder. Copy, Whisper 6. 2 down, 6 remaining. Kira relocated again, faster this time. The spotter from Position 1 had survived her first shot and was now actively searching for her. She had seen him move to a secondary location after his partner fell, abandoning observation equipment to take up a rifle. He was making a mistake. Grief or anger or simple tactical error, he had positioned himself against the morning sky. His silhouette was visible for only moments at a time, but moments were all she needed. 1,200 meters, an easier shot than the first 2. She found him in her scope, tracked his movement pattern, waited for him to pause long enough to present a stationary target. He stopped to scan the ridgeline where her first position had been. He was looking in the wrong direction, searching for a ghost that had already moved on. Kira fired. The spotter collapsed without a sound. 3 down, she said into the radio. 5 remaining. The sun was climbing toward noon. 25 hours remained on Sullivan's clock. Half the enemy snipers were dead, and the other half had no idea where she was or how many shooters they faced. Kira checked her ammunition and began scanning for Target 4. The math was starting to work in their favor. In the Tactical Operations Center, Major Blackwood watched intelligence feed scroll across her screen as enemy radio traffic spiked. The calm of morning had shattered. 3 of their snipers were dead, and the remainder knew something had gone terribly wrong. She keyed her headset. Whisper 6, be advised, intercepts show significant enemy communication increase. They're aware of losses but cannot identify shooter location or number. Multiple units requesting guidance. Kira's response came in a whisper. Copy. Moving to Tango 4 position now. Patterson appeared at Blackwood's shoulder. What's their response pattern? Confusion mostly. They built their positions to watch the Rangers. They have no protocol for an attack from outside the perimeter. But they're learning. Intercepts suggest remaining shooters are adjusting positions. Adjusting how? Pulling back from exposed firing ports, consolidating into hardened locations. They're making themselves harder to hit. Patterson nodded slowly, eyes on the drone feed showing Kira's heat signature moving across the ridge. She rattled them. Now they're going to make her earn every shot. On the ridge, Kira studied the building that held targets 4 and 5 through her scope. A reinforced structure, possibly a former police station, with thick walls and narrow windows. The two shooters had been positioned on separate floors when the mission began. Now they had pulled into a single room on the second floor. Rifles withdrawn from windows, bodies invisible behind concrete and shadow. She scanned for angles. Front windows offered nothing but darkness. Side windows were blocked by an adjacent building. The rear faced a courtyard that would require her to descend from the ridge and approach through open ground where any remaining spotter could see her. One option remained. A narrow alley ran between the target building and its neighbor to the east. If she repositioned 400 meters along the ridge, she might find an angle through that gap. A side window the enemy hadn't considered because the approach seemed impossible from this distance. Kira began to move. The new position took 20 minutes to reach, 20 minutes of careful movement across exposed terrain where every step was calculated to avoid detection. When she settled into the rocky outcrop that gave her the angle she needed, her muscles burned with the effort of controlled motion. Through her scope, the alley resolved into focus, 12 feet wide, shadowed by buildings on either side. And there, visible through a window facing the narrow gap, the outline of a man holding a rifle. Target 4, 1,500 meters. The shot would thread through an opening barely wider than her scope's field of view. Kira calculated windage and drop. The breeze had shifted since her last shot, coming now from southeast at perhaps 5 miles per hour. She adjusted her aim point to compensate and let her breathing slow to the rhythm that preceded every kill. The target shifted. His partner moved somewhere behind him, a shadow crossing deeper shadows of the room. Two men who thought they were safe because they had pulled back from obvious positions. They hadn't considered that someone might find the angle they had dismissed as impossible. Kira fired. The round crossed 1,500 meters and passed through the narrow window. Target 4 dropped. His partner reacted instantly, not with panic but with trained precision, throwing himself deeper into the building, away from any window, away from any angle that could reach him. By the time Kira had cycled her bolt, Target 5 had vanished into the structure's interior. Tango 4 down, she reported. Tango 5 is mobile. No shot available. He's gone to ground inside the structure. Blackwood's voice carried tension. Copy, Whisper 6. 4 down, 4 remaining. Be advised, enemy is mobilizing ground forces to search for shooter. Intercepts indicate patrol deployment to your sector. Estimated 45 minutes until they reach your area. Kira processed this while scanning for any sign of Target 5. Ground forces meant she could no longer rely on distance and concealment alone. They would sweep the ridge with numbers she couldn't match. She would have to move before they arrived. But moving meant abandoning her current position, starting over, finding new angles, calculating new shots, time she didn't have. How long on Sullivan? She asked. 20 hours, maybe less. 20 hours. 3 targets eliminated since her last check. 4 remaining, including 1 who had gone to ground, and 3 who were now adapting to her presence. She had 2 choices. Withdraw to a safe position and wait for the patrol to pass, losing hours she couldn't afford, or accelerate her timeline, take risks she had been avoiding, and trust that speed could compensate for loss of careful preparation. Sullivan didn't have time for careful. Blackwood, Kira said quietly, I'm going to move faster. The shots will be harder, the margins will be tighter, but I can't wait out a patrol and still make the window. Silence on the radio. Then Blackwood's voice, steady and clear. Understood, Whisper 6. We'll keep you updated on patrol movement. Good hunting. The radio clicked off. Kira gathered her equipment and began moving down the ridge toward a position that would put her closer to remaining snipers. Closer to the targets. Closer to the danger converging on her location. 20 hours. 4 targets. One chance to get this right. Target 5 had learned from his partner's death. He had burrowed into the rubble of the police station like a creature retreating into its shell, constructing a hide so deep within debris that no conventional angle could reach him. Kira studied his position through her scope for 11 minutes before she found what she was looking for. A gap in rubble, perhaps 4 inches wide, where the barrel of his rifle extended into open air. He had created a firing port so narrow that he could engage the Rangers while remaining invisible to any counter-sniper. No direct body shot was possible. The rubble formed a wall of concrete and twisted metal that would stop any round she could fire. The only piece of him exposed to the outside world was that rifle barrel. Black steel catching afternoon light through a gap that seemed impossibly small at 1,800 meters. She ran calculations that existed nowhere in any manual she had ever read. Angle of incidence, deflection probability, the physics of a high-velocity round striking hardened steel at precisely the right point. If she hit the barrel at the correct angle, the round wouldn't simply ricochet away. It would transfer energy into the weapon itself, shattering the receiver, driving fragments back into the shooter's position. A theoretical shot. Something discussed in ballistics seminars but never attempted in combat because variables were too precise and probability of success too low. The kind of shot instructors described as mathematically possible but practically impossible. Kira adjusted her aim point to the precise spot on the exposed barrel where physics suggested success. 4 inches of steel at 1,800 meters, a target smaller than her fist, at a distance where atmospheric conditions could push her round meters off course. She controlled her breathing and let the crosshairs settle. The wind had died for the moment, giving her a window of stability that might not last. She had to take the shot now or wait for conditions to align again. And waiting meant giving the ground patrol more time to reach her position. The wind held steady for 3 seconds. She fired. The round crossed 1,800 meters in just over 2 seconds. It struck the rifle barrel at the angle she had calculated, transferring kinetic energy through steel in ways that turned metal into shrapnel and physics into violence. Through her scope, Kira saw the rubble pile shift as debris flew outward from the concealed position. Dust rose in a cloud that obscured the gap where the rifle had been. When it cleared, there was no movement, no sign of life, no barrel extending through the opening. The theoretical shot had become practical reality. Tango 5 eliminated, she reported. Unconventional method, rifle destruction and fragmentation. Blackwood's voice carried something beyond professional acknowledgement. Copy, Whisper 6. 5 down, 3 remaining. Extraction route is partially clear. In the operations center, Colonel Mackenzie stood frozen, staring at the drone feed showing the rubble pile where Tango 5 had been. His hands gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. Blackwood approached carefully. Colonel? That shot. Mackenzie's voice was barely audible. I wrote the theory in 1985, presented it at Fort Benning. Every sniper who heard it said it was mathematically possible, but tactically insane. He looked up, eyes bright. I never had the courage to attempt it in combat. She did. She did. Mackenzie keyed the radio, his voice rough. Whisper 6, Ghost Actual. That barrel shot, I theorized it 40 years ago. You just executed it under combat conditions. That was, he stopped, searching for words. That was the shot I spent my whole career being afraid to take. Kira's voice came back. Your theory, Colonel. I just trusted the physics. No, Mackenzie shook his head even though she couldn't see. I gave you numbers. You gave them courage. There's a difference. Patterson appeared at his shoulder. Colonel, you all right? Mackenzie nodded slowly. I just watched a student become the teacher. She's not using what I taught her anymore. She's building on it, improving it. He smiled slightly. That's what greatness looks like, and I'm honored I got to witness it. In the collapsed building 4 kilometers away, Riker had been watching the enemy position through his scope when it happened. He had seen the distant muzzle flash first, a tiny spark on the ridgeline, so far away it seemed impossible that it could matter. Then, nearly 3 seconds later, the enemy position had erupted. Concrete dust and debris exploding outward from a structure he had assumed was impenetrable. His radio crackled with that same calm voice. Tango 5 eliminated. Rifle barrel shot. Fragmentation effect. Riker lowered his scope and stared at the radio in his hand. He had spent 15 years in the Rangers. He had worked with the best snipers the Army had to offer. He had never heard of anyone making a shot like that. He keyed his handset. Viper 6 to Whisper 6. What the hell was that? I saw the position explode. The response was brief, almost casual. Rifle barrel shot. Fragmentation effect. Sullivan stirred against the wall, his fever-bright eyes finding Riker's face. Captain, how many left? 3, Riker said. 3 left. Sullivan managed something that might have been a smile through the pain. Whoever's out there, I want to buy them a drink when this is over. Riker returned his eye to the scope. Get in line, Sergeant. On the ridge, Kira was already scanning for Target 6. The water tower rose above surrounding buildings like a metal sentinel, its elevated platform providing the best overwatch position in the entire sector. The shooter there had a clear line of sight to the primary extraction route. Until he was eliminated, no helicopter could approach the Rangers without flying through his kill zone. She measured the distance, 2,100 meters, the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range, maybe beyond depending on atmospheric conditions. At that distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds. Wind drift could push it meters off target. She needed to get closer. 1,900 meters or less for a reliable shot. The patrol Blackwood had warned about was moving through the sector below her position. She could see their movement through gaps in buildings, systematic sweeps working toward the ridge. 45 minutes had become 30. Kira gathered her equipment and began moving down the slope, each step taking her closer to the patrol and closer to the water tower. The risk calculation had shifted. Distance from patrol mattered less than distance to target. She had to take the shot she could make. She found a position 15 minutes later. A rocky outcrop on the lower ridge, partially concealed by scrub brush that had somehow survived the war. The water tower filled her scope at 1,800 meters now. Better, but still at the edge of what she could reliably hit. The shooter on the platform was disciplined. He moved rarely and never exposed more than necessary. But he had to observe. He had to watch the extraction route, and watching meant showing himself, however briefly. Kira settled into her new position and began the patient work of finding his pattern. Below her, patrol lights drew closer. Behind her, the sun moved toward the horizon. Somewhere in a collapsed building, Sullivan was dying by degrees. 3 targets remaining, 18 hours on the clock. The most dangerous phase of the mission was just beginning. The patrol appeared without warning. Kira had been moving through a dry creek bed, using the depression for concealment. She came around a bend and found herself 20 meters from 4 enemy soldiers. There was no cover between her position and theirs, no time to retreat, no option except the one she had trained for, but hoped to avoid. The geometry resolved in her mind in a fraction of a second. 4 targets, 12 meters to the nearest. Her rifle was wrong for this distance. too long and unwieldy for close quarters. Her sidearm was already clearing the holster before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The first soldier saw movement and began to raise his weapon. Kira fired twice, center mass, controlled pairs. He dropped before his rifle reached horizontal. The second was turning toward the sound when her third round took him in the chest. The fourth round found the third soldier as he fumbled with his safety. 3 men down in less than 4 seconds. The fourth was faster than his companions. His rifle was up and swinging toward her when her fifth shot punched through his throat. He collapsed against the creek bank, his weapon discharging once into the dirt before he went still. Silence returned to the creek bed. 4 bodies lay in the dust. Kira's pistol was empty, slide locked back, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the evening air. She reloaded with hands that were steady despite adrenaline flooding her system. The single rifle shot from the dying soldier's weapon had echoed across the valley. If anyone was close enough to hear, they would come to investigate. Her position was compromised. The careful approach she had planned was no longer viable. Kira moved immediately, climbing out of the creek bed and pushing east along the ridge. She abandoned the optimal route to the water tower and took the fastest path that offered any concealment at all. Speed over stealth now. 15 minutes later, she found cover behind a cluster of boulders that overlooked the valley. Her breathing was elevated, her muscles burning from rapid movement. She forced herself to slow down, to control the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Through her scope, the water tower rose against the darkening sky. She measured the distance and felt her stomach tighten. 250 meters. Beyond the reliable range of her rifle, beyond the envelope where skill and mathematics could guarantee a hit. At this distance, a gust of wind could push her around 2 meters off target. The patrol encounter had cost her the closer approach. She had no time to find a better angle. The sun was setting and darkness would make the shot impossible. Blackwood's voice came through her earpiece. Whisper 6, be advised. Radio traffic indicates patrol has not returned to checkpoint. Enemy may be aware of engagement. Increase activity in your sector. Copy, Kira responded. I have eyes on Tango 6, suboptimal range, taking the shot anyway. She settled into her position and began the calculations. Bullet drop at 250 meters would be measured in feet, not inches. Windage correction for sustained 8-mile-per-hour crosswind. Air density at current altitude and temperature. The rotation of the Earth itself, which at this distance would affect trajectory by centimeters, that mattered. Her scope could compensate for some of it. Mathematics could approximate the rest. But there would always be variables that couldn't be quantified. At 250 meters, 3 seconds of flight time, success came down to something that couldn't be taught. Instinct born from thousands of hours behind a rifle. Judgment refined through 47 kills that had taught her things no manual could capture. The shooter on the water tower moved. He was checking the extraction route, scanning for helicopter activity. His upper body appeared above the platform railing, silhouetted against fading light. Kira adjusted her aim point high and left, compensation for drop and drift. She was aiming at a spot in empty air where the bullet would arrive at the same moment as the target's body. Firing into the future, trusting physics and experience, and cold certainty that she had done everything possible. She fired. The round left her barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It climbed through the first 100 meters, reaching the apex of its arc. Then began the long descent. Wind pushed it east. Gravity pulled it down. The spinning projectile crossed 2,050 meters in 2.8 seconds. The shooter on the water tower pitched backward and disappeared below the railing. Tango 6 down, Kira reported, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Extraction route is clear. In the collapsed building, Riker heard the report and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 3 days. He keyed his radio, his voice carrying hope for the first time since this nightmare started. Viper 6 to actual requesting immediate extraction. Northern route is open. Blackwood's voice came back immediately. Viper 6, extraction assets are spinning up. ETA 45 minutes. Hold your position. Riker looked at Sullivan, whose eyes had opened at the sound of radio traffic. The sergeant's face was pale and slick with fever, but he managed a weak nod. 45 minutes, Riker told him. We're getting out of here. Sullivan closed his eyes. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer or a thank you to whoever was out there on that ridge. On the ridge, Kira was already scanning for Target 7. The sun had set, and darkness was settling over the valley. 2 targets remaining, 2 obstacles between 12 Rangers and home. She could see their positions on her mental map. They had repositioned after the water tower kill, abandoning their original hides for locations that covered each other, mutually supporting fields of fire. If she engaged one, the other would have her location. They had learned from 6 deaths. They wouldn't make the same mistakes. In the Tactical Operations Center, Blackwood watched the mission clock tick past the 16-hour mark. Sullivan was running out of time. The extraction helicopters were holding at a staging area 20 kilometers away, waiting for confirmation that the final 2 snipers had been eliminated. Brennan stood at the back of the room. He had been there for hours, watching the mission unfold, watching Kira do exactly what he had said was impossible. His face was carefully blank, but Blackwood could see the tension in his shoulders. He was waiting for her to fail. Blackwood keyed her headset. Whisper 6, status check. Sullivan is at 8 hours. Repeat, 8 hours remaining. Kira's voice came back, slightly breathless from movement. Copy. I see them. Both positions. Working the problem. On the ridge, Kira studied the terrain between her current position and Target 7. 300 meters of open ground separated her from the angle she needed. Scattered rocks offered minimal cover. The slope would silhouette her against the night sky if she moved carelessly. But clouds were building to the west, heavy formations that blocked what little moonlight filtered through. She timed the intervals. 90 seconds of shadow followed by 60 seconds of pale illumination. She waited for the next cloud shadow to reach her position, then moved. The open ground passed beneath her in controlled bursts. Run during darkness, freeze during light. Each cycle brought her closer to the position she needed. The final cloud shadow carried her into a shallow depression. She pressed herself against cold earth and forced her breathing to slow. No movement from either enemy position. They hadn't seen her crossing. Through her scope, Target 7's location resolved into focus. A partially collapsed apartment building, upper floors destroyed by artillery, lower floors converted into a fortified position. She could see sandbags in windows, firing ports cut through walls, but she couldn't see the shooter. She scanned the structure methodically. First window empty, second window empty. Third window showed movement that resolved into a rifle barrel and part of a ghillie suit. She marked the position and kept scanning. Fourth window, another rifle barrel. Fifth window, a shape that might have been a shoulder. She counted 4 separate positions showing signs of sniper presence. Dummy positions. Target 7 had created multiple false hides to draw fire, to force her to reveal herself by engaging the wrong target. Only one was real. Kira watched and waited. The real shooter would have to move eventually. The dummies would remain static, props that couldn't quite replicate subtle movements of living tissue. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The cloud cover thickened and steady darkness settled over the valley. In the fourth window, something changed. The rifle barrel moved. Not the subtle shift of fabric adjusting to wind, but deliberate motion of a weapon being repositioned by human hands. Behind the barrel, a face appeared for just a moment as the shooter checked his scope. Target 7 confirmed, 1,500 meters. A clean shot through an open window at a target who thought his decoys made him invisible. Kira fired. The round crossed the distance in less than 2 seconds. Target 7 collapsed behind his sandbags and didn't move again. She was already rolling to a new position when the return shot cracked past her head, close enough that she felt the pressure wave against her skin. Target 8 had been watching. Target 8 had seen her muzzle flash, and now Target 8 was hunting her with the same patience and precision she had used against his comrades. "Tango 7 down," she whispered into her radio. "Tango 8 has my position. He's engaging." Blackwood's voice was tight. "Can you withdraw?" Kiera pressed herself against rocks as another round impacted 3 feet from her head, stone fragments peppering her cheek. "Negative. He has me pinned. This is now a direct engagement." The sniper duel had begun. One-on-one. Hunter against hunter. Whoever moved first would die. Kira stopped breathing and became stone. The round impacted 18 inches from Kira's face. Stone fragments cut her cheek, and she tasted blood where a shard opened her lip. Target 8 was good. He had her general location dialed in and was walking his shots toward her position with methodical precision. She pressed deeper into the rocky depression and controlled her breathing. Movement meant death. The slightest shift would create a silhouette his scope would find. The only thing keeping her alive was absolute stillness and darkness that concealed the precise outline of her form. Through her scope, she studied his position. A reinforced structure 1,700 meters to the northwest. Multiple windows, multiple firing ports. He had seen her muzzle flash when she killed Target 7. He knew her direction, but he didn't know her exact position. Another round cracked past, this one 2 feet to her right. He was bracketing her, splitting the difference between shots to narrow down her location. Professional technique, patient execution. Kira stopped moving entirely. She stopped blinking. She let her body become part of the ridge, indistinguishable from rocks and scrub. The cold seeped through her ghillie suit and into her bones. Her muscles screamed for relief. She ignored everything except the view through her scope. Hours passed. The moon rose and set behind clouds. The temperature dropped until her breath would have fogged if she had allowed herself to exhale fully. Neither sniper moved. Neither sniper fired. Blackwood's voice came through her earpiece, barely audible. "Whisper 6, status check. Sullivan is at 6 hours. Repeat, 6 hours remaining." Kira didn't respond. Any sound, any movement toward the radio could betray her position. She let the information settle and continued to watch. 6 hours. The sun would rise in 4. If she hadn't resolved this by dawn, light would reveal her position and Target 8 would have the advantage. She studied his building through her scope. The windows were black voids. The firing ports showed nothing. He was as disciplined as she was, as patient. But bodies weren't made for permanent stillness. Muscles cramped. Positions shifted. Even the most disciplined shooter had to move eventually. Kiera began counting in her head, tracking minutes that passed without any sign of movement. 10 minutes, 15, 20. At 22 minutes, she saw it. A shadow in the third window shifted by perhaps 3 inches. A shoulder adjusting against the cold. A body seeking relief from the strain of holding position. She marked the window and continued counting. 20 minutes later, the shadow shifted again. Same window, same subtle movement. A pattern born from physical necessity that even professional discipline couldn't completely suppress. Target 8 had a tell. Every 20 minutes, his discipline cracked just enough to create a 3-inch window of vulnerability. 3 inches at 1,700 meters. A target the width of her fist, at a distance where margin for error was measured in fractions of degrees. Kira waited. The next cycle would be her opportunity. 18 minutes, 19, 20. The shadow in the third window shifted. 3 inches of movement, 3 inches of exposed shoulder. Kira fired. The round crossed 1,700 meters in just over 2 seconds. It found the 3-inch target and punched through fabric and flesh and bone. Target 8 jerked backward and disappeared from the window. No return fire came. No movement in the building. The last sniper had fallen. Kira keyed her radio with fingers that trembled from cold and adrenaline. and release of tension that had held her frozen for hours. Tango 8 eliminated. All targets down. Extraction route is clear. 4 kilometers away, Riker heard the transmission and felt something break loose in his chest. He keyed his own radio with a voice that cracked. Viper 6 to actual. Confirm all hostiles eliminated. Request immediate extraction. We have critical casualties. Blackwood's response came immediately. Relief audible even through encrypted channel. Viper 6, extraction assets are inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Prepare for dust-off. Riker lowered the radio and turned to face his Rangers. 12 faces looked back at him, gaunt and exhausted and alive. Sullivan opened his eyes at the sound of approaching rotors. The helicopters were coming in low and fast, no longer afraid of the sky. "Captain," the sergeant whispered through cracked lips. "Did we make it?" Riker gripped his shoulder, feeling the fever heat. "We made it, all of us. Extraction is 15 minutes out." Sullivan closed his eyes. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer or a thank you to whoever had spent the night killing the men who had wanted them dead. On the ridge, Kira lay in her position and listened to helicopters approaching. Her body ached from hours of frozen stillness. Her hands shook as adrenaline drained away. Blood from the cut on her lip had dried against her chin. 8 shots, 8 kills, 12 lives saved. She gathered her equipment and began the long walk to the extraction point. The mission was complete. The Rangers would live. The sun broke over the horizon as she reached the rally point, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. A new day, a day that 12 Rangers would see, because she had refused to accept that impossible was impossible. But even as she moved toward the extraction helicopter waiting in the distance, even as the weight of the mission began to lift, Kira knew this was only the beginning. The shots that mattered weren't the ones that hit targets. They were the ones that opened doors for the people who came after. She had taken her shots. Now she had to make sure they counted for more than just 8 bodies and 12 men going home. The real work was just beginning. The Blackhawks came in low and fast, door gunners scanning for threats that no longer existed. Captain Garrett Riker stood in the gap of the collapsed building and watched them approach, the sound of their rotors the most beautiful thing he had heard in 3 days. He turned to his Rangers. The order came automatically. Priority evacuation. Sullivan, Kimball, and Reyes on the first bird. Walking wounded on the second. Everyone else fills in where there's room. Move! His team responded with discipline that had kept them alive through 72 hours of siege. They carried their wounded toward open ground where helicopters were settling. Movements quick but controlled. Sullivan was strapped to a stretcher, his face gray and slick with fever. Specialist Reyes had done everything possible to keep the infection from spreading, but the sergeant needed surgery that could only happen in a hospital far from this valley. The first helicopter touched down, and the crew chief jumped out to help load casualties. Riker grabbed his arm as Sullivan's stretcher was carried past. Who was the sniper? The one who cleared the route? The crew chief glanced at him, expression neutral. Staff Sergeant Kira Thornwood, support operations. Riker stared at him. Support operations? The crew chief shrugged as he guided Sullivan's stretcher into the helicopter. That's what her patch says. I just fly the birds, Captain. You want details? Ask command. The first helicopter lifted away with Sullivan and the other critical casualties. Riker watched it bank toward the field hospital. The second helicopter loaded the walking wounded. Rodriguez limped aboard with his arm around Mills, both men too exhausted to speak. Harris helped secure the last of the equipment. One by one, the Rangers who had survived the impossible filed into the aircraft that would carry them home. Riker was the last aboard. He took a seat near the door gunner and watched the collapsed building shrink beneath him. 3 days in that concrete tomb. 3 days of watching his people suffer while enemy snipers kept them pinned. And then someone had killed all 8 of those snipers, alone, in a single night. Sullivan stirred on his stretcher as the helicopter reached cruising altitude. The morphine was wearing off and awareness was returning to his eyes. He found Riker's face and managed a weak gesture for him to come closer. Riker leaned in. "How are you feeling, Sergeant?" "Like death warmed over." Sullivan coughed and winced. "What happened out there, Captain? I heard the radio traffic, but I couldn't follow it all." "One sniper," Riker said, still trying to process it, "took out all 8 positions. Solo mission. Shots I've never seen anyone make." Sullivan processed this through fog of fever and medication. "What unit?" Riker paused. "Support operations." "A woman." Sullivan's cracked lips curved into something that might have been a smile through the pain. "Makes sense." Riker frowned. "How does that make sense?" "Because the hard jobs always go to the people nobody's watching." Sullivan's eyes drifted closed. "The people they stick in categories because it's easier than admitting what they can do." The helicopter flew on toward the field hospital. Below them, the valley where they had nearly died faded into the distance. Riker thought about the shots he had witnessed through his scope, the impossible angles and impossible distances. He thought about the calm voice on the radio announcing each kill. Tango 1 down, Tango 2 down, all the way to 8. He had spent 15 years in the Rangers. He had worked with the best shooters in the world, and he had never seen anything like what Staff Sergeant Kiera Thornwood had done in that valley. Sullivan was right. The hard jobs went to the people nobody was watching, and Thornwood had done the hardest job of all. 3 kilometers from the collapsed building, a dusty vehicle waited at the edge of a dirt road. Kiera climbed into the passenger seat and set her rifle between her knees. The driver, a specialist from the motor pool who had been told nothing except to pick up a passenger at these coordinates, glanced at her ghillie suit and the dried blood on her face. "Rough night?" he asked. Kira looked out the window at the valley where she had spent the last 20 hours. 12 Rangers were flying to safety. 8 enemy snipers would never hurt anyone again. And she was riding back to base in a truck with a driver who didn't know her name. She didn't answer the specialist's question. She didn't need to. The truck pulled away and she disappeared into the morning. That was how it worked for people in support operations. That was about to change. General Morrison sat in his office at division headquarters and reviewed the mission logs for the 3rd time. Every communication was there, every decision documented, every objection preserved in the official record exactly as he had ordered. He closed the file and looked up at the 2 officers standing before him. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan stood at rigid attention, his face carefully blank. Major Blackwood waited beside him, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. "Colonel Brennan," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in uniform. "You formally objected to Staff Sergeant Thornwood's deployment. You attempted to abort the mission while it was in progress. You stated on record that her failure would set women in combat roles back 20 years. Is that accurate?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "I made tactical recommendations based on my assessment of the situation, sir." "Your assessment." Morrison opened the file again and read from it. 8 confirmed kills in under 12 hours. Longest shot at 2,050 meters. A rifle barrel deflection kill that our ballistics experts are calling unprecedented. 12 Rangers extracted alive because of her actions. That was the situation you assessed as a failure waiting to happen. Brennan said nothing. Morrison closed the file with deliberate precision. "Your objection is logged. Your attempt to abort is logged. Your comments about women in combat are logged. All of it will be reviewed by a formal board." He paused. "You're relieved of Tactical Operations Command, effective immediately. Dismissed." Brennan saluted and walked out. His career wasn't over yet, but everyone in the room knew how the review would end. Forced retirement. Blackwood remained at attention. Morrison gestured for her to stand at ease. "Major, I want you to pull Staff Sergeant Thornwood's complete personnel file. Every assignment, every evaluation, every recommendation for combat designation that was denied. I want to know how a shooter with her record ended up classified as support operations." Sir, I've already begun that review. Blackwood pulled up a tablet and handed it to Morrison. Her file shows a pattern. Every time she was recommended for combat sniper designation, the paperwork was rejected at the same administrative level. Different reviewing officers over 4 years, but the same result every time. Morrison scrolled through the documents. High-value target eliminations in denied areas. Precision fires supporting operations that officially never happened. Engagement distances matching or exceeding any combat sniper on record. Someone was deliberately keeping her out of combat roles, Morrison said. Yes, sir. The pattern suggests systematic routing to prevent her advancement. Patterson appeared in the doorway. Command Sergeant Major, what did you witness in the Tactical Operations Center during this mission? Patterson's answer was measured. I witnessed Colonel Brennan dismiss Staff Sergeant Thornwood's qualifications based on her administrative designation rather than demonstrated capabilities. I witnessed him predict her failure and attempt to abort a mission that ultimately saved 12 lives. I witnessed him prioritize his assumptions about gender roles over tactical necessity. In your professional opinion, was this about tactics or prejudice? Patterson met Morrison's eyes. Sir, this was about prejudice dressed up in protocol. Morrison nodded slowly. The board will hear your testimony, all of it. The investigation took 2 weeks. Blackwood presented her findings to a board that included Morrison and 3 other general officers. Thornwood's record was laid out in full. 55 confirmed kills across 4 deployments. Engagement distances matching or exceeding any combat sniper in the theater. Mission success rates that spoke to skill that couldn't be denied. The board questioned why she had ever been classified as support operations. Blackwood's answer was simple and devastating. Qualified female snipers had been systematically routed away from combat designations by officers who didn't believe women belonged in those roles. Patterson testified to what he had witnessed. Brennan's dismissal of Thornwood's qualifications, his prediction that she would fail, his attempt to abort the mission while she was actively saving lives. The board's recommendations came down 2 days later. Brennan was offered early retirement. 3 other officers identified in Blackwood's review received formal reprimands. A new policy was issued requiring that sniper qualification be based solely on demonstrated skill, with administrative designations explicitly prohibited from affecting combat assignments. The ceremony for Thornwood was scheduled for the following week. The conference room at division headquarters was small. A handful of officers, no press, no cameras. Morrison had kept it that way deliberately. Some things didn't need to be spectacles. Kira stood at attention in her dress uniform, while Morrison pinned the silver star to her chest. The medal felt heavier than it should have, weighted with meaning that went beyond the mission itself. Blackwood read the citation aloud. For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Staff Sergeant Kira Thornwood distinguished herself through exceptionally valorous actions while conducting a solo counter-sniper operation to eliminate hostile forces threatening friendly personnel. Facing 8 enemy snipers with overlapping fields of fire, Staff Sergeant Thornwood conducted a 12-hour operation that resulted in 8 confirmed kills at engagement distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Her actions included unconventional techniques that expanded the documented capabilities of precision marksmanship, including a successful rifle barrel deflection shot at 1,800 meters. Her exceptional skill and courage under fire directly resulted in the successful extraction of 12 American soldiers who would otherwise have been killed or captured. Morrison shook her hand. The grip was firm. Exceptional work, Staff Sergeant. Kira thanked him quietly and stepped back. The door opened. Captain Riker walked in, still wearing the desert tan uniform issued at the field hospital. He had requested permission to attend. Morrison had granted the request. Riker crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He was taller, broader, with the build of a ranger who had spent 15 years in combat units. She looked up at him, waiting. Staff Sergeant, Riker said. I watched you work through my scope. I saw shots that I didn't believe were possible. My people are alive because of what you did. Kira nodded. I was doing my job, Captain. Riker studied her face. The enemy set a trap that should have been perfect. 8 snipers covering every angle. How did you know they wouldn't be watching each other? Kira met his eyes. Because everyone was so focused on trapping you that they forgot to watch their own backs. She paused. It's the same mistake people make with me. They look at the patch and the designation, and they think they know what I'm capable of. They never consider that the categories might be wrong. Riker absorbed this. The room was silent. They won't make that mistake again, Riker said finally. Kira allowed herself a small smile. No, they won't. She turned and walked out of the conference room, past the officers who had doubted her, and the ones who had believed, past the paperwork that had tried to define her, and the mission that had proved the paperwork wrong. Outside, the sun was bright and the air was warm. She had 8 more kills on her record and a medal on her chest. And nothing had changed about who she was. She was still the woman who made the shots that mattered. She always had been. Now the people who needed to know finally understood. 6 months passed. The story of what happened in that valley spread through military channels, growing and changing with each retelling until facts became legend. But Kira wasn't there to hear most of it. She had returned to her duties, returned to the quiet work that support operations did when nobody was watching. The medal went into a drawer. Life continued. Except that it didn't. Not really. Morrison had made changes. The new policy on sniper qualification wasn't just words on paper. Other qualified female shooters were being pulled from wrong categories and given opportunities that had been denied. And then Morrison had called her into his office with a proposal. Fort Benning in autumn was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with war. Trees turning gold and red, air crisp with promise of winter. Kira stood on the sniper range and watched 8 women move through their drills, ages 22 to 29. Different backgrounds, different reasons for being here, but all united by one thing. They wanted to prove that the categories were wrong. The Advanced Female Combat Sniper Program had been Morrison's idea, a dedicated pipeline to train qualified women for combat sniper roles. He had offered her the position of lead instructor. She had almost said no, almost walked away because it felt too much like becoming a symbol instead of a shooter. But then she had remembered the young woman who had approached her 18 months ago, asking about becoming a sniper, asking if it was possible. She had remembered telling that woman to get better, to prove them wrong. If she walked away from this, who would tell the next one? A young soldier, 23 years old with nervous energy, approached her position. Staff Sergeant Thornwood, what if we're not good enough? Kira looked at her, seeing herself 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago when she had first picked up a rifle. Then you get better. That's what I did. She moved to the firing line and set up a demonstration. The target was 1,800 meters downrange, a training scenario that replicated the rifle barrel shot she had made in that valley 6 months ago. This shot was considered impossible, Kira said to the class. I made it because I stopped believing in impossible. She settled behind the rifle, controlled her breathing, let calculations run through her mind. Wind and distance and angle and all the variables that determine whether metal found metal in the way she intended. She fired. Downrange, the training target's simulated rifle barrel shattered exactly as designed. The class watched in stunned silence. 8 women seeing proof that things they had been told were impossible were just things that hadn't been done yet. Kira stood and faced them. Colonel Mackenzie trained me, gave me every tool I needed. She paused. But he couldn't give me permission to use them. That came from inside. She pointed at targets scattered across the range. You'll face people who doubt you. Some will be enemies. Some will be allies who love you. She paused. Doesn't matter. Only question that matters is, do you doubt yourself? She gestured to the firing line. Those targets are 1,800 meters away. By the end of this course, you'll hit them. Not because I say you can, because you know you can. The class moved to their positions with determination. From the observation tower 50 meters away, Colonel James Mackenzie watched through binoculars. He had arrived at Fort Benning 2 months ago, officially retired, but unretired at Morrison's request to serve as program director. Major Blackwood stood beside him, reviewing course schedules. She had been assigned as a program's operations officer. "She's a better teacher than you were," Blackwood said. Mackenzie lowered the binoculars. "I know. She teaches them to believe. I taught them to perform." "What's the difference?" "Performance can be trained. Belief has to come from inside." He gestured toward the range where Kira was correcting a student's position. "She's building something I never could, not because I didn't have the skill, but because I didn't have her reason." Blackwood glanced at him. "What's her reason?" Mackenzie watched Kira demonstrate proper breathing technique. "She remembers what it felt like to be told no, so she's making sure the next generation hears yes." On the firing line, Kira moved from student to student, correcting positions and sight pictures. But more than that, she was teaching them something that couldn't be found in any manual. She was teaching them that categories were temporary, that labels were just words, that the only limitation that mattered was the one you accepted in your own mind. 8 women who had been told they didn't belong were learning that belonging was the wrong question. The right question was whether you could make the shot. And Kira was teaching them that the answer was yes. The sun moved toward the horizon, painting the range in shades of gold. Kira called for a break, and the class secured their weapons. She walked toward the observation tower. Mackenzie met her at the base, his weathered face showing the years, but also showing something new. Pride mixed with humility. "They're doing well," Mackenzie said. Kira nodded. "They're ready to learn. That's half the battle. The other half? Believing they deserve to be here." She looked back at the range. "I spent 4 years being told I didn't belong. Took me most of that time to realize the only person who needed to believe I belonged was me." Mackenzie was quiet for a moment. "I should have fought harder for you. When the certifications kept getting denied, I should have pushed back." Kira met his eyes. "You did what you could within the system you understood. The system was wrong, not you. The system doesn't change without people willing to break it. And people don't break systems without others showing them it's possible." She smiled slightly. "You trained me. That mattered. What I did with that training was my choice, but I couldn't have made it without your foundation." They stood in comfortable silence, teacher and student, who had become something more complicated than those simple categories allow. "Morrison wants me to expand the program," Mackenzie said. "Double the class size. Add advanced courses for qualified instructors." "Can we handle it?" "Can you handle it? You're doing most of the actual teaching." Kira considered. "We'll need more range time, better equipment, and we'll need to make sure we're not lowering standards to increase numbers." "Standards stay where they are. That's non-negotiable." "Good." She paused. "Then yes, we can handle it." Mackenzie nodded. "I'll tell Morrison." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Kira, thank you." "For what?" "For showing me I didn't have to be perfect to matter. I spent 45 years trying to be the best. Took watching you to realize being the best doesn't matter as much as being what's needed when it's needed." Kira didn't have words for that. She just nodded, and Mackenzie walked away toward the administrative building. She turned back to the range where her students were waiting. 8 women who would become 16, who would become 32, who would become however many it took until the question of whether women belonged in combat roles became so obviously answered that people stopped asking. The door was open now. Her job was to make sure it stayed that way. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Kira stood before her first graduating class. 8 women who had started as uncertain shooters and had become qualified combat snipers through determination and training and refusal to accept that categories define capability. The ceremony brought Morrison, Patterson, Blackwood, and Riker, who brought Sullivan, recovered from infection and returned to duty. But the moment that mattered most to Kira was when each graduate crossed the stage to receive their combat sniper certification. The piece of paper that said they belonged, that said the Army recognized their capability, that said the categories had finally caught up with reality. The young woman who had asked if she was good enough 6 months ago crossed last. She took her certificate with hands that didn't shake, with eyes that showed confidence earned through 1,000 hours of training. Kira shook her hand. "Congratulations, you earned this." The woman smiled. "You showed us it was possible. We just had to believe it." After the ceremony, after the handshakes and photographs, Kira found herself standing alone on the range. The sun was setting, painting targets in shades of orange and red. She thought about the valley 6 months ago, about 8 shots that had saved 12 lives, about the moment when everything she had trained for came down to whether she could make shots that existed at the edge of what was possible. She had made those shots. But more importantly, she had made it possible for others to believe they could make their own shots. Her radio buzzed. Blackwood's voice came through. "Thornwood, Morrison wants to see you in his office tomorrow morning. He has a proposal." Kira smiled slightly. With Morrison, proposals usually meant something that would change everything. "Copy that. What's it about?" He didn't say, but he was talking to the Secretary of Defense earlier, so probably something big. The radio clicked off. Kira stood on the range and watched the sun disappear below the horizon. She had spent 4 years being told she didn't belong. Then she had spent 20 hours proving that belonging was the wrong question. And now she was spending her time making sure the next generation didn't have to prove anything except to themselves. The shots that mattered weren't the ones that hit targets at impossible distances. They were the ones that opened doors, the ones that changed minds, the ones that made people question whether the categories they believed in were actually true. She had taken her shots, 8 in one night that saved 12 lives, hundreds more in the years before. But the most important shots were the ones being taken right now by 8 women who had graduated today, and the 16 who would graduate in 3 months, and all the ones who would come after because the door was open and someone was holding it that way. Kira picked up her rifle and headed toward the armory. Tomorrow Morrison would have a proposal. Tomorrow there would be new challenges and new missions and new shots to take. She walked into the fading light, rifle slung across her back. Tomorrow Morrison would propose something new. Tomorrow would bring challenges she couldn't yet see. But tonight, on a range where 8 women had learned that impossible was just untried, Kira Thornwood understood what legacy actually meant. Not the shots that killed 8 snipers, not the medal in her drawer, not even the 12 Rangers who lived. Legacy was the door she held open. Legacy was the next shooter who wouldn't have to fight the battles she'd fought just to be allowed to fight. She had taken her impossible shots. Now others would take theirs. The categories were broken, the door was open, and that, finally, was enough.